Imagine a version of Ocarina of Time where Link explores Hyrule Field as a massive open-world RPG, where Ganondorf's design is far more sinister than anything players ever encountered, where entire dungeons and characters were completely different from the masterpiece gamers know today. These aren't fan fantasies, these are real concepts that Nintendo developed, then abandoned. The question is, what secrets lie buried in Ocarina of Time's lost alpha builds, and how different could this legendary game have been? The story begins in the late 1990s when Nintendo was pushing the Nintendo 64 to its absolute limits. Ocarina of Time wasn't just another Zelda game, it was Nintendo's flagship title, their proof that three-dimensional gaming could deliver the same magic as the beloved Super Nintendo classics. But what players received in November 1998 was actually the result of countless revisions, cuts, and reimaginings. The alpha versions, they reveal an entirely different Hyrule. Over the years, dedicated fans and researchers have unearthed beta screenshots, early gameplay footage from trade shows like Space World 1995 and 1996, and even developer interviews that shed light on Ocarina of Time's tumultuous development. What these discoveries reveal is staggering. Entire regions that never made it into the final game, character designs that were completely scrapped, and gameplay mechanics that could have revolutionized the series years before the Breath of the Wild. Let's start with the landscapes, the very foundation of Hyrule itself. When players boot up Ocarina of Time, they're greeted with Hyrule Field, that iconic expanse connecting all the major regions. But early alpha concepts show something radically different. In pre-release footage from Space World 1996, Hyrule Field appears more densely populated with structures, obstacles, and what seem to be interactive environmental elements that didn't survive to the final version. One of the most fascinating discoveries involves early area concepts that showcase vastly different geography. Screenshots reveal a beta version of what appears to be Kokiri Forest, but with a layout completely unlike the cozy enclosed village players know. The early design featured more open pathways, different house placements, and what researchers believe could have been a more explorable forest region beyond the starting area. Then there's the mysterious beta temples and dungeons. Data miners examining the game's code have found references to unused dungeon elements, including what appears to be an early ice cavern concept that was far more elaborate than the final version in the final game. The beta ice cavern reportedly included additional puzzle rooms, different enemy placements, and environmental hazards that were simplified or removed entirely, likely due to the Nintendo 64's hardware limitations. But perhaps the most intriguing location that never was? The Unicorn Fountain. Early development materials reference a location called the Unicorn Fountain, which some researchers believe could have been an early concept for what eventually became the Great Fairy Fountains. The name alone sparks imagination. Were unicorns originally planned for Hyrule? What role would they have played? The answers remain locked in Nintendo's vaults. Now let's talk about the characters, because the people and creatures of Hyrule went through dramatic transformations during development. Link himself had several design iterations before settling on the iconic look players recognize. Early concept art shows Link with slightly different proportions, varying tunic shades, and even alternative hairstyles. While these changes seem subtle, they reveal how meticulously Nintendo crafted every aspect of the Hero of Time's appearance. Ganondorf's evolution is even more dramatic. Beta screenshots and early renders show Ganondorf with design elements that make him appear more monstrous and alien compared to the final version's more humanoid Gerudo appearance. Some early concepts depicted Ganondorf with wilder hair, more exaggerated facial features, and armor designs that emphasized his role as a dark sorcerer rather than a calculating usurper. The decision to make him more human actually makes him more terrifying because players can see the cruel intelligence behind those eyes. Princess Zelda also underwent revisions. Early artwork shows young Zelda with slightly different clothing designs and facial features. More significantly, there's evidence suggesting that Zelda's role in the story was adjusted during development, with some researchers speculating that her transformation into Sheik might have been a later addition to the narrative. While this remains unconfirmed, it's fascinating to consider how different the story would feel without the Sheik revelation. And then there are the NPCs, the inhabitants that bring Hyrule to life. Beta versions show several characters who were either significantly altered or cut entirely. The Running Man, who challenges players in a race in Hyrule Field, appears in early footage with a completely different character model. The Poe Collector had different dialogue trees. Even the Skull Kid, yes, the character who would become central to Majora's Mask, went through design changes that made him less creepy and more mischievous in appearance. One of the most mysterious cut characters? References in the game's code point to unused NPCs whose purposes remain unknown. Some data miners have discovered dialogue fragments, character IDs, and even animation data for characters that never appear in the final game. Who were they? What roles did they serve? These digital ghosts haunt Ocarina of Time's code, silent witnesses to development decisions lost to time. But the real game changers, pun intended, are the mechanics that never made it past the cutting room floor. The final version of Ocarina of Time features relatively straightforward combat, centered around Z-targeting, the Master Sword, and a selection of sub-weapons. But evidence suggests Nintendo experimented with far more complex systems during development. One persistent rumor, partially backed by early magazine previews, involves a more robust item customization system. Some pre-release materials hinted at the ability to modify or upgrade items beyond the standard progression of hookshot to longshot, or finding bottle upgrades. While never fully detailed, this concept tantalizes with possibilities. Imagine being able to customize arrow types beyond fire, ice, and light, or modifying the hookshot's chain length and speed. The combat system itself appears to have gone through significant iterations. Early gameplay demonstrations show Link fighting with slightly different animations and what appears to be a more dynamic response system to enemy attacks. Some researchers believe Nintendo experimented with a more complex combo system or parrying mechanics that were ultimately simplified. The Z-targeting system, which became Ocarina of Time's signature innovation, was itself refined extensively. Early versions showed different camera behaviors and lock-on indicators. Perhaps most intriguingly, there's evidence of experimentation with the game's progression structure. The final version of Ocarina of Time follows a fairly linear path through the child dungeons, the time skip, and then the adult dungeons. However, data mining and analysis of beta elements suggest Nintendo considered a more non-linear approach. Unused dungeon connections, alternative item placements, and mysterious warp points in the code hint at possible branching paths or sequence-breaking opportunities that were closed off. The magic system also shows signs of abandoned complexity. While the final game features relatively simple magic consumption for spells, beta elements suggest a more nuanced system might have been planned. References to unused magic types, different magic effects, and what appears to be an early version of magic meter management that was more granular than the final implementation. And then there's the mysterious beta quest content. Fragments in the game's data reference unused quest flags, dialogue triggers, and event sequences that don't correspond to anything in the final game. Were these placeholder tests, or were they fully planned quests that got cut for time or technical reasons? One particularly intriguing example involves unused flags related to the Gerudo Fortress infiltration, suggesting this sequence might have been even more elaborate originally. The trading sequence, where players exchange items in a chain to eventually get the Bigoron sword, shows evidence of being more complex in beta versions. Unused items in the code, alternative trading partners, and different reward structures hinted a more expansive side quest network. Some researchers speculate that the trading sequence was trimmed down from a more ambitious system that would have rivaled later Zelda games' side quest complexity. So why were all these ambitious concepts abandoned? The answer lies in the brutal reality of game development on Nintendo 64 hardware. The system's limitations, particularly cartridge storage space, processing power, and memory constraints, forced Nintendo to make difficult choices. Every texture, every polygon, every line of code had to fight for space on that tiny cartridge. Director Shigeru Miyamoto and his team faced a classic developer dilemma, sacrificing scope for polish, breadth for depth. In interviews from the era, Miyamoto emphasized Nintendo's philosophy of prioritizing what works perfectly over including everything imaginable. If a feature didn't enhance the core experience or couldn't be implemented without compromises, it was cut. This ruthless editing process is precisely why Ocarina of Time feels so refined. Every element that survived earned its place. The time constraints were equally brutal. Ocarina of Time's development stretched longer than initially planned, but Nintendo couldn't delay indefinitely. The Nintendo 64 needed flagship software, and third-party support was already wavering. Features that required extensive testing, debugging, or additional development time became casualties of the release calendar. It's a reminder that even masterpieces are products of compromise and deadline pressure. Technical limitations specifically shaped major decisions. The Nintendo 64's texture memory meant that elaborate environmental details had to be simplified. The cartridge size limitation meant entire areas had to be cut or condensed. The console's processing power determined how many characters could appear on screen, how complex animations could be, and how detailed models could render. When developers talk about polishing a game, this is what they mean: taking the grand vision and sculpting it to fit reality. Yet, there's something fascinating about what was gained through these limitations. By focusing on core mechanics, Nintendo ensured that Z-targeting felt perfect, that dungeon puzzles were meticulously tested, and that the story landed with maximum emotional impact. A more sprawling, feature-packed version of Ocarina of Time might have felt unfocused or technically compromised. The version players received? It's laser-focused, every element working in harmony. The philosophical question becomes, is a finished masterpiece better than an ambitious but flawed experiment? Ocarina of Time's critical acclaim, its influence on game design, and its enduring legacy suggest Nintendo made the right calls. But that doesn't stop fans from wondering about the roads not taken, the Hyrule that could have been. So let's indulge in some speculation. What if these beta concepts had been realized? Imagine an Ocarina of Time with truly open-world exploration, where players could tackle dungeons in varying orders, where Hyrule Field was densely packed with secrets and side activities. Would it have been revolutionary, or would it have diluted the focused experience that made the game legendary? A more complex combat system could have added depth for skilled players, but might have raised the barrier to entry for newcomers. The beauty of Ocarina of Time's Z-targeting is its accessibility. Anyone can learn it, but mastering its nuances takes practice. More complexity might have alienated the broad audience that made the game a phenomenon. Similarly, a more elaborate magic system or item customization could have appealed to RPG fans seeking deeper mechanical hooks, but would it have interfered with the elegant simplicity that defines Zelda gameplay? The series has always balanced action, puzzle solving, and exploration. Adding too many systems risks making it feel like a different franchise entirely. The cut areas and extended quest content are perhaps the most tantalizing what-ifs. An even larger Hyrule with more locations to discover, more characters to meet, and more stories to uncover sounds incredible. But would it have maintained the tight pacing that keeps players engaged from the Deku Tree to Ganon's Tower? Sometimes less truly is more, especially when every location and quest serves the narrative. What's remarkable is how echoes of these abandoned concepts appear in later Zelda titles. The more open-world approach that might have been cut from Ocarina of Time eventually manifested in Breath of the Wild, vindication decades later that the ideas weren't bad, just ahead of their time and technology. The complex combat systems experimented with in beta found new life in Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword's motion controls. Even specific cut content found second chances. The darker, more elaborate dungeons that couldn't fit on the Nintendo 64 cartridge, they influenced the design philosophy of Majora's Mask, which pushed the console's limits with its time mechanics and transformation system. The unused character concepts, many design elements were recycled and refined for future games in the franchise. The item customization and upgrade systems that were simplified for Ocarina of Time became central features in the Wind Waker's salvaging system and Skyward Sword's upgrade mechanics. Nintendo rarely throws ideas away completely, they just wait for the right game and hardware to bring them to life. This is why studying beta content isn't just nostalgia, it's seeing the DNA of future innovations. The lasting legacy of Ocarina of Time's development struggles is a masterclass in game design philosophy. It proves that constraints breed creativity, that saying no to good ideas in service of great execution is essential, and that the path to a masterpiece is paved with difficult cuts and painful compromises. Every developer working today can learn from Nintendo's ruthless commitment to quality over quantity. For fans, these beta discoveries provide something precious, a deeper appreciation for the final product. Understanding what was sacrificed makes players notice the intentionality behind every design choice. That perfectly paced dungeon progression, it came at the cost of open-world freedom. Those polished combat mechanics, they emerged from abandoned complexity. The tight, focused narrative, it replaced more sprawling quest content. There's also something beautiful about the mystery itself. Not every question about Ocarina of Time's development has been answered. Some beta content remains unexplained, some design documents are still locked away, and some decisions Nintendo made may never be fully documented. This uncertainty keeps the conversation alive, keeps researchers digging, and keeps fans theorizing. The community that is formed around preserving and studying beta content deserves recognition. These dedicated fans, data miners, and gaming historians spend countless hours examining code, comparing screenshots, translating Japanese interviews, and piecing together the story of how Ocarina of Time came to be. Their work ensures that even abandoned ideas aren't forgotten. They become part of gaming history. What's particularly striking is how Ocarina of Time's beta content has influenced fan projects and ROM hacks. Modders have attempted to reconstruct cut areas based on beta screenshots, to implement unused mechanics based on code fragments, and to create what-if versions that explore roads not taken. While these aren't official, they represent fans' love for the game and curiosity about its unrealized potential. The broader lesson here extends beyond Zelda, beyond Nintendo, beyond gaming even. Creative projects in any medium involve the same process: grand visions meeting practical realities, ambitious concepts being refined through iteration, and final products representing both what was achieved and what was sacrificed. The stories behind the stories are often as compelling as the stories themselves. For Ocarina of Time specifically, understanding its turbulent development adds layers to an already rich experience. When players stand in Hyrule Field, they can imagine it as it might have been: more populated, more complex, more elaborate. When they battle Ganondorf, they can picture his more monstrous beta design. When they solve dungeon puzzles, they can wonder about the mechanics that never were. This isn't about lamenting what was lost, it's about celebrating what was created. The beta content shows how many ideas Nintendo explored, how many possibilities they considered, and how thoughtfully they curated the final experience. Every cut was intentional, every simplification deliberate, every change made in service of creating something timeless. In Timeless, it truly is. More than 25 years after release, Ocarina of Time remains a touchstone in gaming. It's cited in countless greatest games of all time lists, influenced generations of developers, and introduced millions of players to gaming. Would a version with all the beta content have achieved the same legendary status? Possibly, but the version Nintendo delivered clearly resonated with the world. The alternate irony: by cutting content to create a focused, polished experience, Nintendo ensured that Ocarina of Time would endure long enough for fans to discover and celebrate that very cut content. If the game had been unfocused or technically compromised, it might have been forgotten, and all those beta concepts would have died in obscurity. Instead, the game's success guaranteed its development history would be preserved and studied. As technology advances and game preservation becomes more sophisticated, more beta content will undoubtedly surface. Future discoveries might reveal concept art that changes understanding of Hyrule's design, early story drafts that alter interpretation of the narrative, or prototype builds that show just how different the game once was. The story of Ocarina of Time's development isn't finished, it's ongoing. For players revisiting the game today, whether on Nintendo 64, GameCube, 3DS, or modern emulation, the knowledge of what might have been adds a new dimension to the experience. Each location becomes a window into alternate possibilities, each character a reminder of design iterations, each mechanic evidence of refinement through iteration. The development of Ocarina of Time stands as testament to Nintendo's perfectionism, their willingness to make hard choices, and their understanding that sometimes the best thing a creator can do is know what to leave out. The result isn't just a great game, it's a case study in artistic discipline, technical problem solving, and creative vision meeting practical execution. What secrets still remain hidden in Ocarina of Time's code? What design documents sit in Nintendo's archives, unseen by public eyes? What stories could the developers tell if they sat down for comprehensive interviews about every cut and change? These questions may never be fully answered, and perhaps that's fitting for a game that's all about the passage of time, the weight of choices, and the paths not taken. In the end, the beta content of Ocarina of Time serves a beautiful purpose. It reminds players that even masterpieces are born from messy, chaotic creative processes. Behind the polished exterior lies months or years of experimentation, failure, iteration, and tough decisions. The magic isn't that everything worked perfectly from the start. The magic is that talented people worked tirelessly to make it perfect by the end. So the next time players boot up Ocarina of Time, whether for the first time or the 100th, they can appreciate it on multiple levels, as the groundbreaking game it is, as the influential masterpiece it became, and as the survivor of a development process that could have gone in countless directions. Those beta concepts, those abandoned ideas, those roads not taken, they're not failures, they're the foundation upon which the legend was built. What if Ocarina of Time looked totally different? What if those beta concepts had been realized? The answer is both simple and profound. It would have been a different game. Perhaps better in some ways, perhaps worse in others, but undeniably different. And sometimes the most important what if isn't about what could have been, it's about appreciating what actually is. Ocarina of Time, in all its refined, focused, intentionally crafted glory, stands as proof that great art requires not just bold ideas, but the wisdom to know which ideas to pursue and which to leave behind.